We'll give Jonathan a minute to rejoin. That's our fallback, is leaving and rejoining.
Yeah, it works.
So it looks like we're missing Sana and Heather.
Yes. I see Will. Hi, Will. Hi, Maggie.
Hello.
Yeah, it looks like Sana, Marina, and Heather are missing at this time.
But we do have a quorum on this hot day.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm inclined to start just because everybody is hot and wants to go jump in the lake or cool off. So yes, the meeting is being recorded. So first, I think like to recap the housing forum and thank everyone for participating in that. And it was also recorded and is available on the Cornwall website. And I encourage people to watch it if they haven't watched it. So any thoughts on that from the group? Yeah.
I thought it went smoothly and it seemed to be well received by the participants.
Right. Yeah, I had a couple people say how much they enjoyed hearing the latest information. So that was good.
And it was wonderful getting the participation of Patricia and Melanie.
It
That
was.
really made it came alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're right.
I thought
Yeah.
the presentations were fantastic. They really
Yeah.
were great. So thanks to everybody.
Yeah. Great. So now we have housing strategy brainstorming sessions, all concepts that may be considered for the affordable housing plan. Janelle, did you have some slides you wanted to put up at this point, or do we want to go around and have people's input?
I do have slides. If anyone has any ideas before I bring them up on the screen, happy to jump right in with ideas. The slides can guide us on some of the strategies that were in the plan of conservation and development, and then we can decide whether we want to proceed with them in the plan. Before I bring those slides up, does anyone have any questions at this time from the committee just on our process? Okay.
One question, sorry, and
Yeah.
I should know the answer to this, Janelle, but I'm just
Okay.
curious, like how detailed are we expected how detailed a plan are we expected to have?
Yeah, great question. So 830J, the statute that we're fulfilling by preparing this plan, is vague.
Yeah,
Typical
I
of-
just went to read it, and yes.
Yes, very typical of some
Yeah.
statutory elements, but the guidelines, so there's a 28-page Connecticut guideline document that's on the webpage, which is advisory. So it's helpful. What I really encourage the group to do as you think through the strategies, focus on the fact that it's a 5-year plan. So that time frame, just thinking through what's realistic, what's feasible. And then another thing to really think about is what can possibly be implemented. So just truly making sure that those goals, if we're defining our goals and we're developing strategies, that there are some details of how we can reach those goals. Just from planning perspective, goals can be very great, but if we don't have strong steps as to how to reach those goals, the plan won't be perceived as useful. So truly, I envision it as bolstering what is said about housing within the plan of conservation and development, digging down a bit deeper into strategies, and then thinking through that 5-year factor, which is the cycle that the statute has us on.
Great, thanks.
Great.
Yeah.
Sounds
And I see Maggie.
I was interested this afternoon. I was looking through the various notes, and I came upon one thing from the Regional Housing Council, I don't know, 5 years ago. I can't remember what we were talking about, but it was something Jocelyn said that rather than worry about looking at, say, a model from the state or borrowing from other towns, a good way to focus is to think about what's missing in your own regulations, or in what way affordable housing seems to be stymied in your town, and then work at what might make that smoother.
That's great insight. How about I bring up those slides? Because I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
the slides, so let me do that. Jonathan, how are you audio? Okay, good. So here we go. So can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So cruising right along, let's see here. So I am jumping back to where we were. So these goals were formulated. This concept was born out of the preparation for that housing forum. And I just wanted to bring up this slide to make sure that there's a consensus amongst the group that in writing this plan, that these are truly the goals of that plan. If anyone's reading through these goals, these were born of just thinking through what data we wanted to include for the housing forum. If anyone on the committee wants to further discuss any of these goals will work their way into the housing plan, but we can certainly change them in any way. I just want to make sure that they capture some of the thinking of the group.
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Ingrid, no, go ahead. Go
Well, I
ahead.
was gonna say, okay, thank you, Anna. So I think they're excellent. My one, in looking at them again, it strikes me that this reads as if this is sort of only for people who like we want our children, we want our seniors, rather than kind of opening up our doors to new people coming into the community and new neighbors. And so I just want to put that on the table, that I think we could, I might push for the language to be a little bit more inclusive.
Great point.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ingrid, especially because we have seen an increase in young families with kids moving to town, which is, met a long-term or, well, a short-term goal, whatever it is, of the town. And again, that wouldn't happen if people hadn't moved here. So I like to say there are no walls in Cornwall. So I think we should try to keep that idea going, that we encourage people to move here. And I think also we have seen, and I don't know where the individual examples come in, but in the last week, I've had people come up to me and say, I need to downsize, but I have to move out of town to do it. And this is a 40-year resident. And I just also had a conversation with a woman in town whose 20-year-old child is living in Cornwall, but it's in their basement. So again, if we can, I don't know if we need examples of that to strengthen some of this, but it certainly is playing out in more ways that is not routine. And again, if somebody's in somebody's basement, that gets to be old after a while, because they've been looking for places to live with, a good income, and there's just nothing. So I don't know. But these hit it, but I think broaden it out, why not?
Great.
I mean, I think you can easily fix the wording.
Mm-hmm.
We want, for example, we want our children to be able to live in Cornwall. We also want we also want young people in general to find a home in Cornwall.
Or just families with children to be able to live in Cornwall.
That's another one. Now we're going to go into
Why don't I tweak?
generalities.
Right.
Why don't I tweak with this language for next time, so we don't spend too much time on this? I'll broaden it out. Are there any other comments though before I move on with any of the concepts in these goals or is the group
Well-
in consensus?
Another thing that came up in this last month or this last 3 months is somewhere we should put in the current fact that there is no rental housing available in Cornwall right now, probably for the first time in the town's history. I mean, there's rental housing for $4,000 a month, but that's it. So for 270 years or something, we've had rental housing. There is none. It's gone. So that shows you how important the work of this committee is and how important this issue is. There's no rent. I mean, it used to be you can get something maybe 1,500, but there's nothing. They've all gone.
Would that not be included in diversity of housing types?
Yeah, but I think also if we can be specific as of this work, I mean, this is our goal, but maybe to say, at some
Okay.
point in the plan, we should say, as of right now, we're writing this plan, we're seeing all these goals, the need for all these goals play out individually in the town and collectively in the fact that the housing market is spiked, so there is no rental housing.
Yeah, so Gordon, how I envision crafting this plan is certainly to use all of that data. So from I believe it was our second and our third meeting, we really looked at a lot of graphs and a lot of numbers and a lot of data to present the data in the plan, and then use that data as the rationale behind how we're getting to these goals, and then the strategies to link back to how they can satisfy what these goals are.
So let's add a goal about rentals.
Okay, great. Okay. So any further thoughts before we move on into some of the strategies discussion? Okay, hearing none, to move right along. So this next slide, this was provided to me from Chair of P&Z. This was developed by, and Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, by the Subcommittee on Housing during the time that the Plan of Conservation and Development was being crafted. And these were a lot of housing strategies. I think where our work lies is to look at them, decide where it is that we might want to build upon them, where it is they may have already been addressed by work that has been done, and then really think through how they could potentially relate to affordable housing and come through in our plan. So that's the point of just bringing this slide and those details before us today. So what we can do, and anyone jump in at any time, but what we can do is work our way through what the subcommittee devised as far as housing strategies go, and then discern whether or not they seem like valuable pieces that should make their way into our plan to then be cohesive with what the Plan of Conservation and Development says.
Fine.
Okay, great. So looking at the first bullet, we have encourage private giving of land and funding to Cornwall Housing Corporation. I have one thought on this, and it just links back also not only private land, but also potentially to create conversation with the state regarding land that they might own. Due in fact that affordable housing and the housing crisis is being recognized by the state. They're mandating that a lot of towns get proactive and implement their plans. So even to think through the state as a potential partner.
I think that's a great idea because the state is the biggest landowner in town, and it's also, for the last 5 years, the biggest purchaser of land in the town of Cornwall. And I understand they have their goals and priorities, but for over 20 years, I've asked various state officials if they could give us just a little bit of land for housing. And the answer is generally no. Well, it's always no. And meanwhile, there's money to provide by hundreds of acres for mostly forest land or whatever, which is fine, but we already have 6,000 or 7,000 acres of forest land. And I think it's appropriate to talk to our largest landowner and purchaser of land, as it's all the same it's the same state, although I understand different agencies have different responsibilities. It's still not bad to put that in the state plan. That, in my mind, one of the reasons there's less land on the market is the state sets the floor for buying large tracts of land.
It can't hurt to try.
Yeah.
They pressure
absolutely.
us, we could try applying a little pressure back
Mhm.
through
Right.
our local reps.
Yeah.
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 Talk to, start a
I agree
partner.
completely. I actually was going to say the same thing and just ask, I don't know whether, I have no idea where the state land is, but anyway, at some point it might be useful if we can get a map or something, but
It's in the town plan.
it's in the town plan. Okay.
I can provide that, Ingrid, so
Okay.
you can have a closer look. Yeah.
And what's also interesting in this town plan, because I know like 20 years ago, I went out with Ken Keskin when he was head of the Housing Corporation, and the state does own these little odd pieces that were former gravel banks or are disconnected from
Yeah.
the main parks. They're just odd pieces of land the state has, and they're out there. But because I mean, obviously, we're not talking about putting a big housing complex in the middle of Mohawk State Forest or Houstonic State Forest. But there are these odd pieces of property. Some of them have cellar homes. Some of them used to have houses on them. That seems like it could be pretty benign and would help us. Just
Yeah.
like,
We should look at that.
yeah.
We looked at it 15 years ago and couldn't move them at all. But it's a new world.
It's a different
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. My thinking is too, just in following some of the recent legislation, it looks like the state OPM in particular is going to be watching us, forming a working group to make sure that we are implementing the plans. So I think with the added pressure that towns will have to satisfy what it is that are in the housing plans, it may be an opportunity for us to leverage back to the state and say, you know, there's only so much land. There are a lot of environmental factors that we always have to consider. So just thinking through where they could be a partner. I know they often, we don't think of them potentially as maybe a project partner, but just thinking through, I think all strategies and keeping in mind that these are unprecedented times and the way that we've always done things might not apply anymore.
Because my other feeling too is when we dug into this, we found that some towns have no parks, no open space, no state presence at all. And especially some of those are very heavily populated. And on a day like today, where it's better to be than in a park or whatever, whatever. I'm sure they're experts and know more than I do, but it just seemed crazy that there are places with a lot of people and no green space. And here we have, we have plenty and we're getting more quickly. So, yeah.
No, Maggie, I don't intend to put you on the spot at all, but I was just wondering in the past how the Cornwall Housing Corporation would fundraise or encourage giving of land and funds.
In some cases, we actually asked people for bits of land when we could see that there was a large holding and it was on a usable road and the slopes and everything were right. And in other cases, we were just the extremely lucky passive recipients. I mean, phone calls would just come and say, what do I do to give some land to the housing corporation?
Great, thank you. So moving right along, the next one is change regulations for a free second cut. So I've highlighted this one in blue. Back in January of 2021, that actually was passed by the P&Z as an amendment to the regulations. So it's important to note that this free second cut is essentially if a private landowner wishes to take a parcel of their property and give it to the Cornwall Housing Corporation or another nonprofit, that they can do so and they would be exempt from the subdivision regulations. That was an important step in an amendment to the regulations that the P&Z did pass. So the next one says allow multifamily housing. Do we
What
want
does
to
that
get?
mean?
Yeah.
We allow it, but only if it's town or nonprofit sponsored, correct?
I'll give you an example that I've thought of. You know, there are a certain number of houses in town that are big and old and have 6 or 7 bedrooms and are owned by people who may be seniors aging in place. Those homes could theoretically be converted into a 2-family home. So that was just an idea I had in terms of what multifamily housing might look like. And we do have under the next one down, allow conversion of existing homes to multiple units. The way that regulation is written, it's a bit weird. The houses have to be at least, what is it, Janelle, 15 years old?
Yeah, we'll get to that slide of the existing regulations, but I believe that's exactly what it reads. It has to be 15 years old.
I think that was to keep people from coming in and building express multifamily back when it was written.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Would it be something that Cornwall citizens would accept to allow 2-family homes to be built in town?
Well,
I mean, that's part of the dilemma. We don't know what Cornwall citizens would or would not accept. All we can do is make a recommendation.
right.
We already have the conversion of existing homes to multiple units. So we already have de facto a multifamily. It's anchored by the fact that it has to be owner occupied and the size of the apartments is cut, I think, at 1,200 square feet or something. So it's not true multifamily, but I don't think it's that scary an idea for Cornwall.
I think it's not scary because nobody's ever done it because
Yes.
it's like it's so restrictive, it won't happen. So that's, I mean, other than having the housing corporation be able to go through all the hoops, having everybody all that line up. But to Anna's point, I think that this is something that's being encouraged. And why don't we put it in there and allow P&Z to wrestle with how do you do it? I mean,
Thanks.
again, it's hard. We don't have enough to do right now anyway, but you know, in the future, it'd be hard to probably get rental housing without some multifamily housing. I think so, and whatever, and there's ways to fit it, but the argument's been made that you can basically build, you know, and what has been done is we've had houses of 12,000 square feet for one family, but you can't build a house of 6,000 square feet for 2 families. So, I mean, I think that's going to be challenged at some point statewide, but I just think as a goal, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with having 2 families in a house. That does happen in West Cornwall and everybody seems to be happy. So why not have it in there as something, you know, these things, this committee does not have the power to enact any of this. It just has the power to recommend this is the way things should go.
Well, I think,
Go ahead,
No, go, please.
Anna, you were.
yeah. No, multifamily housing is a very big concept at the state level right now. There, you know, the group Desegregate Connecticut has been very loud about publishing the names of the towns in Connecticut that do not allow multifamily housing. So Cornwall is kind of on the list of shame, so to speak. And I think we can figure out a way to do it without bringing in 10 units.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, I mean, in some ways, I think you can also make an argument that it actually is, you know, it actually is a way to conserve rural land, right? Because you're sort of building more densely on some buildable land. So it's actually, it's environmentally, it makes sense. You know, it can lead to more walkability too. You can create, it's just, I think there are a lot of ways to make this less scary than all of a sudden we're, you know, dividing up Connecticut and adding, dividing up Cornwall and adding like 1,000 new single family homes. I mean, it actually would have less of an impact on the community if you're building multifamily housing.
Sure.
Yeah,
And you
and
think-
this conversation has definitely come up amongst a lot of planners. The new term that a lot of people are using is the middle housing. So less so multiple units, big block, but rather 2 to 4 units, something of a more digestible size when it comes to housing that's more in scale with what's to be expected with the built environment in our area. So that's definitely a lot of.
Look at all those units in Norfolk. In
Correct.
5 different buildings, they had 12 units or something like that. It's very, very in scale for their town or ours.
And Lakeville also has some that are really nice.
Yeah. I just want to say.
Yeah, good. Mhm.
No, Anna, please.
My comments are mostly unnecessary, so go on.
I just want to say, so I use the bullets that are up on the screen just as the starting point of our discussion. So because an idea is not up here, this was born of the subcommittee on housing for the Plan of Conservation and Development. So please, by any means, if anything strikes, this was a starting point for all of us to have a discussion. But I really don't want to feel like we're bound to this. It's important that we work with the Plan of Conservation and Development, but also to think through any new ideas, any different ideas, or to even elaborate on some of these ideas. I just wanted to say that one thought.
These all feed into the more general statements that are the goal statements. And those goal statements, you could have any number of strategies enumerating. I mean, I guess where I'm going as chair of P&Z is that if the P&Z is ever going to amend Cornwall's zoning regulations to promote more diverse and affordable and attainable housing, we're going to have to be sure that what we do is in the town plan as a goal, that it meets the goal. We don't have to use the strategies they suggested. We could use plenty of other strategies that we could come up with. But I think that committee worked hard, and I think the ideas they came up with are all definitely worth considering.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to touch upon the concept of conversions in multifamily, just thinking through adaptive reuse of buildings. So not necessarily that our solutions will come from a new build, but perhaps an underutilized building, or a building that's been empty for a while. Granted, sometimes rehabilitation does cost a lot of money, but there's a lot to be said for preserving and also, to your point, Ingrid, like not developing more land. Okay, so moving right along, this gets us into flexibility of accessory apartments. And I do note here, there was recently a big legislative update that we'll get to. So a lot of these strategies around accessory apartments, we might not want to focus too heavily on because some of the state legislation will have made those decisions for us. So we'll get to that. I do have a slide just to talk those through and talk through how the legislative updates are germane to our housing topic and to our housing discussion. And then, so this next subcommittee thought was decrease minimum lot size in certain locations.
I think we should deal with easier to accomplish goals before even. I mean, I think it's nice that it's in there as consider, but we've got a lot of of more effective, quicker ways of broadening the housing than that, I think. I think that would be a hard sell.
Great.
So Janelle, because one thing too, do our current regulations allow for cluster housing? If somebody had a large piece of ground and they wanted to cluster houses, do we allow for that currently?
So Gordon, that falls into the planned conservation zone right now. That's an overlay zone, and I don't believe to date it's been utilized.
It was hopefully supposed to encourage owners of tracts of farmland to be able to cut off a bit and without wasting the land, be able to put in housing, but it never got used. Priscilla Morrow was a big backer of that, way long gone.
But there already is some provision for that in our current regs.
Right, it exists, nobody has used it.
That would be a situation under which that would make sense. And if we already allow it, I would agree with Maggie. We've got other things that probably will have more impact than that broad topic.
Great.
So can I ask a question? And I don't know, maybe that does fall on, maybe this falls under the cluster, but in some sense, as I understand the free second cut, right, that's for if you basically dedicate a portion, either donate or dedicate a part of your land for affordable housing. So that's kind of like an inclusionary zoning, in that you're relaxing certain zoning regulations for people who are building dedicated affordable housing. And I'm wondering whether you could think about the minimum lot size as reducing that requirement if you are building a dedicated affordable unit. And whether you think that would be an easier sell
I
rather than
noticed,
doing wholesale.
I noticed the other day that when Ginny Potter donated, and correct me if I'm wrong, Maggie, but the two properties that she divided off were 1 acre each.
Mm-hmm.
And that Green Hill, that road is a 3 acre zone.
Well, she retained more than 3 acres
No, I understand, but how
For
could
the new
anybody
housing.
build on the 1 acre?
Yeah.
because that's a special permit. To develop those lots, the housing corporation has to go through special permit.
I see, okay.
So it's a
And
question of whether we want to make that as of right.
I don't, I
For
think it's
affordable units.
okay to keep it special permit. I mean, I think people feel as though it isn't a huge burden for an organization to go through the special permit process. It's harder for an individual. And I think it makes the rest of the town feel as though there's still some oversight into intensifying.
Who gets to live here?
Excuse me?
Oversight into who gets to live here?
Who gets to what?
Live here.
No, it's if you're, I mean, what the special permit process is for is when you're asking for an intensified use. I mean, a use that's more intense than the regulations give everybody in town. And it doesn't bother me as the applicant, as the Cornwall Housing Corporation, to have to show that it's not going to get up anybody's nose when we do these things.
Okay,
Through the
that's
special
fine,
permit.
Maggie.
Yeah.
That sounds
I just
fine.
wonder whether, would this committee want to put some language recommending that is it P&Z that considers these special permits, that they consider the value of affordable housing in making that determination, or something that kind of, because I just, I don't know. I mean, this is sort of, I'm not saying this would happen in Cornwall, but often in, communities across the state and across the country that affordable housing has to go through special permits, and they don't get them because people don't want affordable housing units in their backyard.
Have you ever had that experience, Maggie?
No, I mean, we've had we've had the experience where there's been a certain amount of hyperlocal pushback against a particular project.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about Ella Clark's lot up on Upper Town Street where Susan Francisco now lives, where the totally absentee neighbor came and threatened to sue us back to the dark ages and stuck his finger in Gordon's chest and said he was going to sue his personal ass. And it all worked out, you know. I mean, you have to listen to all those people. The Planning and Zoning Commission has to base their decision on what's in the regulations as what they've considered, and they have to write it very clearly to show that they've listened, and yet their regulations permit them to make the decision they're making, and that's okay.
Okay.
It happened to a certain extent when Bonnybrook was built, but again, you just justify it and keep going. And if the regulations and the town plan all support it, hats off.
Okay.
I don't want to jump the gun on the legislative update at all, but the Zoning Enabling Act, that's 8-2, that holds the P&Z and grants them the powers that they have. Now in regulations, it's required so that they address significant disparities in housing needs and access to educational, occupational, and other opportunities. So that's new legislation that requires the P&Z to truly look at opportunity. So just thinking through that, the Planning and Zoning Commission, they're held to 8-2, which gives them their powers, and the state is getting much more focused on economic disparities, housing opportunity, and really requiring that regulations include housing across a spectrum of incomes. So if that helps to bolster just what it is that the state is looking for P&Zs to be tasked with doing.
Well, that sounds helpful, very helpful.
Yeah, that was a big part of that. And I'll get to it, sorry to jump ahead, but the House Bill 6107 that just recently passed.
But I'm wondering, I'm going back to what Ingrid said. If we could avoid those circumstances where Gordon gets a finger pushed in his chest and threats to his personal financial well-being by having that right built right into the regulations from the get-go.
To Ingrid's point, that IHZ concept, so incentive housing zone, commonly referred to as an IHZ, that is a site plan review. So that's under a little bit of a different guidelines as far as scrutiny goes.
We haven't talked about incentive housing zones.
I believe Jocelyn did do some work in Cornwall on an incentive housing zone at one point in time.
It was very unpopular from what I've been told.
That's my understanding.
My feeling about the special permit versus by right face-off is that what works best is, you know, to leave the special permit requirement in place where it already is, just so you're not alarming people by removing what they think of as necessary breaks on a process, and go ahead and have a couple of really successful special permit applications for, say, accessory apartments or conversion of older buildings to apartments. And then everybody gets to see that this is not life-changing. This is a very good Cornwallian way to increase housing availability. And then if there are sufficient reasons to want to withdraw the special permit bind, or whatever you want to call it, you can point to the fact that there haven't been any downsides to these past conversions.
Maggie is always very wise. That's what I have to say about that. I'm gonna,
Alright.
I'll drop, I won't bring it up again.
Got it. My goal is to shoot for an hour for the meeting, so
Great.
if we can keep moving along here, I think that'll be good. And again, I think a lot of these, it's good to flesh out these ideas, but I think they hold up to scrutiny pretty well.
Okay. So moving right along, do we want to keep going one by one, or do we want to
Sure.
jump around?
Let's just
Keep going. Almost there.
move on to the next slide. We can read that.
Oh, well, we'll just finish this one up. So it looks like increased possibility for smaller homes. This is the next one.
Right?
Currently, our buildable area is 20,000 square feet. And the Planning and Zoning Commission has in the past discussed this topic. I believe it will be a topic that comes up again, and much more likely to become a topic that comes up again if this subcommittee encourages it.
Yeah, I think this is particularly relevant in Cornwall, given the slopes and wetlands. So you effectively push a lot of these hilly lots into a special permit if they aren't able to show that buildable area. So it's a pretty difficult problem for some of the lots that are quite stressed by the fact that they have either wetlands or hills or a combination of the two.
And it's usually possible to accommodate, the problem with the buildable area by building a smaller home. So I think that we
I
could
think we
make
should
that.
leave it there.
You
I
think
think
we should leave?
I think we should look at that because I don't think it's entirely coincidental that our overall housing program has slowed down in town at the same time, because I think it's almost the same time. I mean, the buildable area concept, I don't think is that old. And I think it may be one of the impediments to building housing in general. If we can look for a little more flexibility or different tools, the toolbox might be a good thing.
So we touched upon co-housing.
Good.
And then moving along to that next one, update regulations. So ADA adoptions are hassle-free. From my knowledge, a lot of ADA adaptations, such as a handicap ramp, etc., they wouldn't be subject to the setback requirements. So we should be in good shape when it comes to a zoning perspective on that one. I can't speak for building code, but as far as from what I've seen, zoning regulations statutorily are very forgiving when it does come to ADA requirements.
Okay.
That's
Good.
a good one. And then this did come up during the housing forum. Lastly, community revolving loan fund. So that was the presentation given by Iron Bank on the possibility of having, I believe the examples provided was Norfolk. They do have one. But having a community revolving loan fund.
We're waiting to go into detail till we get further along. Is that so?
Yeah, I would be happy to reach back out to the bank to see what it is that the town would need to do, and also reach out to Norfolk to talk to them about seed money. My thought around seed money also, again, back to the state, provided that they're also looking, so through these legislative updates, they were also looking around strategies of how they could possibly fund more efforts towards housing. And it looks like they are looking at the Connecticut Finance Authority to bring back this concept of revolving loans and to have some of the state being sort of the seed for these revolving loan funds. That's through CHAFA, is my understanding.
When I was looking around earlier, I found that the 2010 town plan was more specific in how to fund this and talked about using conveyance fees or fees in lieu, or say 1% of building costs, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that all filters through the Board of Selectmen. They have to determine whether to go for that and also how it's allocated. But I know from regional housing that there's some towns which have, quite a nice war chest to draw upon, no matter who's administering it. I think some towns, maybe it was Goshen, had a hard time in prying that out of the town in order to use for housing. But it could be used for housing or acquisition of public land or a bunch of things. But I think it would be good to explore that so that there are ways in which everybody is participating in this, not just the people to whom the nonprofits go time after time.
Mm-hmm.
So-
Mag, I also think of home maintenance for this one. So that whole concept of seniors being able to age in
Right.
place or maintain their
Right.
home. Yeah.
So Maggie, can you find some success stories on community war chest and how they got their chests?
Well, I think they got them in the ways that I'm describing, at least the ones that I know about, which are Goshen and Washington,
All right.
and maybe Roxbury. I can't remember, but I will find out more if that's my assignment.
Good. Great. Thank you.
Maggie, I can do so with you as well.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Okay, so moving right along, let me move on to our next slide. No, sorry, wrong direction. So this is just an overview of the zoning regulations, and you'll see here we touch upon that multifamily development. So right now it is town or nonprofit sponsored, which is permitted. And then there are limitations. Always keep in mind too, our limitations due to septic and well capacity. And then getting into the conversion. So as our regulations are currently written, it's building older than 15 years. They may be converted into apartment use by special permit, and that's no more than 4 units total. And there has to be an owner occupation in one of those units. It's very light on elderly housing in the current regulations. Elderly is not defined, and it just says that it can be established through a special permit in Cornwall Plains zone. And then finally, accessory dwelling units, so efficiency units, etc. They are currently allowed in business buildings, allowed in residential zones with site plans for attached and special permit approval for detached, and that owner occupation is required. But getting on to the last slide that I have prepared for today is the legislative update. Sorry, I keep going backwards. The legislative update. So getting into what was recently passed, this was all the part of a bigger 28-page House bill that has gone through, signed by our governor and will be effective. So in short, what we're affected by as the housing group, land use reform and housing, is this concept of accessory dwelling units by right. So under this update to the statute, by right, accessory dwelling units will be required, meaning every house that has a single family lot, so every lot with a single family dwelling will be allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit, and that's detached or attached. And it creates a maximum floor area that can be, so it's creating a maximum floor area that can't be smaller than 30% of the primary dwelling, and then also limiting parking so that only one parking space can be required. So that
Currently required 2, I think.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they really, the strategy behind this came out of Desegregate Connecticut. A lot of these land use reforms were pushed by this activist group in really thinking through how we can increase our housing supply within the state. So this came as a result, new legislation. There is, I believe it's October 1st effective date. And it does say within the statutes that the regulations that don't get changed will become null and void. So if a town is in conflict with what the state is saying, due to the nature of the way our government works, the state rules will override our local rules.
So now would that mean that, I mean, I think that we're allowed 1 accessory unit by right already, but we have to supply a site plan. Does this say, this means you don't even have to do a site plan, you just go to Karen?
Correct. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And it does take away, I know there was a lot of owner occupation requirements, so that either one or the other, so whether someone was in this apartment unit or in the full-time unit, that doesn't get talked about as far as the statute goes.
And also, one thing we can consider is allowing in the least densely populated town in Connecticut to have more than one, maybe have 2 accessory dwelling units, 1 attached and 1 detached per lot, if it meets the health code and building codes and all the other codes. And so if we did something like that, the state legislation would impact that or not? We'd be able to do something even more generous than what the state legislation calls for.
I have a sort of an overarching question that talks about that, Gordon. Could I bring it in now?
Sure.
Which is, I've always been confused because I can't remember, legislative intent or anything like that about when we made these regulations. That if you're doing a conversion of an existing older building, you could have up to 4 apartments in it. But if you're doing an accessory apartment, you're limited to the 1. And it seems to me that the way the regulations are currently, that you have that first accessory apartment by right, and any accessory apartment which involves changing the exterior of the building, or there's one other thing, if it involves, putting it in an accessory building, then you have to go to special permit, which, as I've said, doesn't trouble me. But it seems to me that if you're allowing multiple apartments in a building subject to special permit, you ought to have the same possibility, subject to special permit, of showing that building into which you would like to put more than 1 accessory apartment can handle it, and that the neighborhood can handle it, and that there's adequate parking and adequate septic and et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't seem that these are terribly different options, especially, well, no, I guess owner occupation is still part of the conversion rig, and owner occupation could be part still of a more generous allowance of accessory apartment use of a building. I mean, what's different between accessory apartments and apartment use. I don't get it.
I don't either.
Well, the conversion would be of an existing building. So the
Yeah, I think
requirement,
accessories is building a new structure. Is that the only difference?
Well, no, even if you have right now, you couldn't even put 2 accessory apartments into the same existing building.
Maggie, I happen to have been a new member on the commission when the accessory apartment regulation was initiated and discussed and passed. And I can tell you that not once was that the whole apartment, the 4 units, 4 apartments in a single home, that was never touched upon. I don't think it was even considered. It was just an omission. And, you know, it's worth thinking about. I think what you're saying makes eminent sense. We have to have regulations that have some kind of internal logic.
Right,
And as things stand now, they don't in this regard.
right. I think it would be nice if it were possible, where the circumstances don't work against it, circumstances taking everything into account, that you could have a couple of accessory apartments in a building and an accessory apartment in an outlying building. I mean, if it's a great way to create more units without ferocious costs. And obviously they'd be rental.
And I think
And
also that that's sort of where the market's going. If you look at actually what people have been applying for, it is for these accessory apartments. It's the best way to bring on rental units. And it also has the advantage that if you drive around and if you're really, really sharp, you can't even tell where they are. So it's not like you're bringing on 15 rental units in one spot. There, I mean, to me, they just have tremendous advantages that we should really put this at the top of the list and allow more of this, especially, you know,
And
make
it,
them to be bigger and allow more of them.
it's already tried and true in Cornwall. And I think
Correct.
that's a factor, as Maggie pointed out, that makes it more acceptable to people. So yeah, I'd go
Right.
for that.
Good.
okay, last
Yeah.
2 points on this slide really quick. And then I'm keeping an eye on time there, Gordon. So I see it's 1 minute to 5. So finally, multi-unit housing, oftentimes you do see higher permit fees for more than 1 unit. That is no longer allowed per this legislative update. And then a really interesting result of a lot of what Desegregate Connecticut pushed for is the use of the term character. And that's really getting it out of the zoning regulations, saying that the use of the term character should be replaced with physical site characteristics to ensure that regulations are not used against people and used for delineation of the physical nature of places, which is what P&Z is tasked to do. So that was a big part of the legislation. There's a lot to it. It's about 28 pages, but this is what I gleaned as important and germane to the work that we'll be doing for the plan. My next thought, seeing that it is 5 o'clock, I feel that between the strategies that the POCD prompted us with, the discussion that we had today, and all of the data that we've looked at, if everyone wants a summer month off to not have a meeting, I can get to working and get to drafting. If we feel like we want to discuss strategies at the end of July, I'm more than happy to convene another meeting and really dig in more. In the meantime, I will be preparing a draft, taking a lot of the data, lining up our goals, and then creating sort of what would become the beginning of our plan. It's really up to everyone if you feel that we should meet again, discuss what will go into the plan, or if you would prefer to take a little break and then reconvene in August.
If I could ask, I think we could go a few minutes over. If we ask the people of this committee who haven't spoken yet, do any of you have any ideas that you're just dying to share with us about how things could be improved? Will, you, for example. Ha, you're right under me, so you were my target.
Yeah, I mean, one idea that I had was a housing counselor. So Gordon and other representatives of the town are nice enough to pick up the phone for folks in need of either rental housing or potentially purchasing a home in the area. But I think it would be really great to have a counselor that people know they have access to. They could act as their fiduciary to help them guide them through the process, shepherd them through some of the concerns. I think it can be a little daunting when you call up planning and zoning or inland wetlands and you walk away from a conversation and you don't really know what the next steps are. And when you ask the next steps, they're not really given. So then you have to call up an engineer who doesn't return your phone call for 4 to 6 weeks. And then you're kind of moving on to the next opportunity. And so I think that does happen in real life a fair amount. And we can provide the necessary guidance to incoming people or other people that are looking to make a move or looking to start a project in town and kind of help them out with who they need to talk to, recommended resources, and help them in their decision to whether they want to engage in the town of Cornwall or potentially expand what they're doing here. So that's one idea I wanted to put on the board, is just a housing counselor of some kind who can act in the capacity of helping people make decisions in Cornwall.
It's a great idea.
Good idea. I'm picturing another assistant for Heather Deneen. Or another burden on her poor shoulders.
Could add
Heather's
plate.
This is not- Heather's busy, but anyway, great idea, Will. Because it is hard to connect, the dots a lot of the time, and the playbook's gotten increasingly complicated.
Yeah, and the legislation itself, I mean, as someone that is just learning it, it seems like I learn something new every day. I certainly learned a few things about the regs just in this presentation alone, and been attending the P&Z meetings for 6 or 8 months now. So I think there's a lot of depth to them, and it would help to have someone that could kind of surface the most important points and point people in the right direction.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you. Priscilla hasn't said anything. I'm just putting people on the spot.
All right, so
I do have to run though.
yeah,
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Will.
much.
I will.
Good evening.
I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, that was good.
Mhm.
okay. So the other thing that was on the agenda was public outreach, Cornwall Chronicle insert. I think at this point it might be good to hold our insert until we develop the plan a little bit more, because we will have another forum, another hearing, another something. When we get it more developed, we could, if we wanted to, we could highlight some of the things that were said at the housing forum. But what does the group feel about that? Do we need to insert at this point, or do you want to hold our insert to another time?
Let's hold till we have a chance to discuss it.
Right. Okay.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
If we don't have a July meeting, I mean, I like being able to stay flexible about that, but I'm wondering, Janelle, if when you're working on a draft, whether things that you complete could be posted to our website so that we can see them and maybe get an idea of whether there's enough to chew on for a July meeting.
I love that approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And if I could just comment about having an insert before our final forum, there's a lot to digest about affordable housing. And I think it's politic to give people information in chunks that they can absorb. So you don't just suddenly spring all these strategies on them. Does that make sense?
That's good. Yep.
So, I mean, I do think we should have an insert, kind of like a rah, this is why we're doing what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish and what the laws, I don't know. I don't even want to talk about what should be in it. I just think it should be informative and get
Right.
people thinking.
Right. That's good. Okay. Okay, so anything else from the committee? Anything else from Janelle?
No, so well, yes, I guess we will keep July 26th open. I will start preparing drafts and then up to the committee should we meet. So keep that date tentative. And then also looking into August. So just knowing that we're pulling a lot of the information we've gone over a lot, finally pulling it into a document.
Okay,
Okay, we'll keep that open.
thanks.
Great.
Thanks.
Bye,
Okay,
everybody.
all right. So is there any public comments?
Whoops.
Any-
other
Oh,
comments?
oops, sorry.
Do I?
Yes, I have a question.
Hi,
Okay.
Priscilla.
Yes.
Um,
So Joanne, I just let you know, heads up, I have been informed by the town attorney that when we have public comment for town boards, we should receive them as public comments, not as an attempt to have a large public dialogue and ask a lot of questions to a committee. This is all town committees can receive written questions and get really good answers, but we're supposed to distinguish between public comment and public dialogue, and I'll have more details about this thoughts at our selectmen's meeting next week. But anyway, go ahead, public comment.
But I'll be interested to hear it. But I don't want anyone to faint because I'm going to agree with Maggie Cooley. I think that her points about the special permit are well taken. And if anybody can remember back to when Bonnie Book was presented initially, it was presented as two basically motel type units where access for the washing machines was actually required the residents to take their laundry outside to the end of the building. So in the special permit process, there was a resubmit of the new design that was actually built that resulted, I think, in a more attractive and fitting building and better usability for the residents. So I strongly endorse her comment that the special permit process be left in place. And I also would like to ask Janelle, if you're going to prepare, as Anna suggested, chunks of information, will you be making, or would you please make the draft elements available to the public? You know, it's very hard to write a question, Gordon, before the meeting. I mean, a lot of questions come up because of the interaction we hear at the meeting. So, you know, unless you're a mind reader and know what's going to come up, it really limits the ability of the public to make any meaningful contributions. And also the very fact that any public comment or whatever you're saying, want to call it, is always at the end of the meeting after the group has discussed things. So they can't consider the issues that people might be interested in. I just hope also that the next meeting will be properly noticed in a time frame that will enable people to better plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And our meetings are scheduled last Monday of the month, 4 o'clock. So, okay, so then any other public comment?
I have a comment.
Okay,
Yeah, I thought this was a really great meeting and thank you to everyone. And thank you, Maggie, for so much information that you've given us about like different ways we can make this work in Cornwall. I think that's the approach, like you say, like I think you said it's like a good Cornwall way. And I think that's the way we want to begin this process, so that everyone is working together, that we don't start from the assumption that people are going to be opposed, but that people are all really on the same page and they want what's good for the town. So that's, I just really thought that was great. Thank you. And there were a couple of, yeah, and to add to that bit about public comment, I mean, right now it's 5:12 and pretty much everyone wants to go cut this meeting off. So it really doesn't allow a lot of time to ask questions and really get answers. And about that new procedure that's going to be put in place about not having discussions, I really don't think that's the way to bring people together. I think if we want to bring people together, perhaps what we should do is just have a section at the meetings where you could pose a question in the chat and you could either be called upon or not, and you can kind of follow up on discussions. Like Maggie brought up these really good points about multifamily housing and planned conservation zones, and there was some discussion there about what's allowed or not. And I didn't understand really what's allowed after hearing that. I think there could have been more time for that. Or, for example, the idea of buying the state land, who would that be bought from, and that kind of thing. So I think there are a lot of things that were discussed here that if we allow the public to participate and ask questions in the chat, it could create that good dialogue that Maggie's proposing, that we all kind of work together towards doing what's good for the town. And I think it doesn't just benefit, large property owners in town. It benefits the people who are trying to get this affordable housing, because they don't want to move into a housing complex that caused a lot of consternation. I've actually heard that from people who didn't want to move into some projects in other towns because they felt like there was too much divisiveness about it. So I think it really benefits everyone. So I would just reiterate, and I would ask that the committee, the last question is this still going to be prepared by September? I know the first timeline was that Janelle would have the draft by September ready to go. Is that the case? Is that still the timeline you guys are on?
I believe it's been extended to the end of the year. Is that right, Janelle?
Correct.
Okay.
No, not finished. I mean, the draft ready for public review. Is that September?
We'll see how it goes. She's going to be busy this summer, and again, a draft's a draft. So.
Okay. Oh, and one last point. One last point. There was under the legislation, the new legislation that was made, towns can actually opt out of some of those requirements. So they can opt out, for example, so to go to Maggie Cooley's point about the special permit process, you can opt out of requirements to have it be an as right a requirement for accessory housing. And the same thing for the parking spaces, you can opt out as well. So I think it's really important that we realize that we do have local control here, and we don't have to do what the state is telling us to do if it's not in the interest of Cornwall. Thank you.
Okay, any other public comments?
I see Michelle Ship, Gordon.
Yes, Michelle.
Hi, I agree. This was a great meeting. I love the strategies. I think the multifamily of existing large houses is really an easy way. It doesn't change the look of Cornwall. I know if you drive through Torrington, there's lots of places you can say beautiful old houses that have more than one family living in them and still look like typical area houses. I would like to encourage the owner occupied requirement to be loosened. I think that as our citizens age, we're going to find houses passing to family members. The family could keep the house in their family and rent it out, but not if they were living in it. And those families may already have a home. The multifamily also option gives the point for the aged to live in their house while still having rental income to help support them living in their house, which might help to keep them in their house. That works with the owner occupied, but not always. I know I personally had to move my grandfather out of his house, put him in assisted living, and use the rental income to pay for his assisted living. So there's a number of different ways I think we can be creative to help our seniors as well as our young adults that need a place to live. And I totally support Will's idea of a housing counselor. There are several of you on this meeting that I reached out to with something I had an idea of that I couldn't find the information they needed. And gratefully our town has such helpful people, but it would be nice. It took me 3 phone calls to get my answer. So one housing counselor would make that project a lot easier. But I think we're definitely on the right track, and thank you guys for being open to looking to new ideas.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comments. Any other comments? Going once, going twice. Thank you all. Stay cool, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.